So 1122, my church here in Jacksonville, hosts this big event every year called Saturated, where they fly in pastors from all over the country to come and preach. We worship a bunch, and it's from Wednesday to Sunday, and there's a new pastor that preaches every single day. And man, I went to Saturated last year, I went to Saturated the year before, and each year it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And it's crazy because first off, there was no room to park. We got there 25, 30 minutes early, no room to park. This place was so packed with thousands and thousands of people. I go to a big church, but that place you could not fill up anymore. There were people standing just to hear the message and to worship together. And I just am kind of thinking back over the events recently, and there's so much spewing of commentary and people happy, people sad, people in between about everything that's been going on. And unfortunate side of things is the fact that people are somehow celebrating some of these things. But nonetheless, you walk into a church like that, and it gives you such a sigh of relief knowing how many people are faithful to Jesus Christ. And man, I was just thinking about the sermon that was preached yesterday, and a lot of it was stretching our imagination for what is possible to happen in our city in Jacksonville. Our church is one of the top 5 fastest growing churches in America right now, and you have a pastor who is a true pastor. He's not a false prophet. He preaches one thing, and he preaches the gospel. That's it. He preaches out of the word. Not authority over, but authority under the gospel. And it basically had me thinking about whenever I first moved to Jacksonville. My decision to move to Jacksonville was such an interesting decision because I was interviewing in Raleigh, North Carolina at the time, and I had totally thought that I was going to be living in North Carolina, and I got redirected to another interview in Jacksonville, and for some reason, I basically made that decision within 48 hours. And I'm not the type of person who typically does that. I'm a homebody. I like to do a lot of research before I move somewhere. I was totally dead set on moving to North Carolina. And I always described to people whenever I had first gotten there, I said, I don't know, it just was like I was so open to moving, and I didn't really think much of the decision, and I just decided to do it. I had no friends, I had no family that was living there. And it's so interesting because I'm realizing it now that my ease of my decision was stemming from the Lord putting that on my heart and saying, without me understanding at the time, basically telling me you need to go there. And I just thought it was like, I'm open to a new place, I'm cool with it, whatever, we'll make this work. And I didn't have anything squared away at that point. I'm in so much debt from PT school and undergrad. I didn't even know where I was living whenever I moved down there. I was bouncing between Airbnbs until I was able to find an apartment to move into whenever I moved to Jax. And I just think to myself that, and I can reflect now, that was God on my heart telling me I should do that. And I didn't think it was him. I thought it was my own conscious decision that like, oh, this is weird. I just feel totally fine with moving here. And I'm realizing now that it was the Lord. And it's wonderful to see that and reflect now, because whenever I first moved down here, my dad was helping me move in, and we drove by this church, And I said, hey, Dad, that's the church that, I think that's the church that a couple of my patients recommended. I was looking for a church to get involved with. They had recommended to me, it's called 1122. And we drive by, and he's looking out the window and say, oh, okay, it's a pretty big church. And I said, we look down at the clock, and it's 11:22. I mean, all right, fine, that's coincidence. We could say that at the time. So that was odd, but that was a coincidence. So then I get involved with the church, and then I go and, I'm talking about how much I enjoy it. I'm telling my family. I'm in the clinic, and they're preaching on John 10:10 in a series, and I see a new guy come into the clinic, and he was a motocross rider, got in a really bad car accident or motorcycle wreck in one of his comps that he was competing in, and him and I got to know each other just through the clinic. And then one day he was wearing a wristband that they were giving out at church, and it says John 10:10 on it, and it says the Good Shepherd. And I looked down and I was like, did you go to 11:22? And he goes, yeah, I go to 11:22. Fast forward a year, now one of my best friends, Evan, him and I got baptized together in the Atlantic Ocean. My girlfriend and his fiance are very, very close. Evan is one of my best friends now, pushes me in my faith. Really, really good influence on me. And another crazy coincidence that this is what's happening. And so then I start working with the running community a lot in my clinic. We treat a lot of runners in the area. My name gets thrown around to a big ultra marathon runner, competitive runner, Mark. Mark comes in to see me, and he's laying on the table, and we're talking, first time meeting, we're talking about where we're from. He's like, I'm from Pennsylvania. I'm like, oh my gosh, where in Pennsylvania are you from? And he said, Williamsport, home of the Little League World Series. I said, oh, that's interesting. My aunt and uncle are from Williamsport. And he asked me who my aunt and uncle were, because Williamsport's not too big, so a lot of people know each other there. And sure enough, my aunt and uncle are his neighbors. And he no longer lives in Williamsport, but his dad does. And his dad still comes over to my aunt and uncle's house for dinner every Sunday night. Another coincidence. And then I get introduced to this guy named Tom from Mark. He's another ultra marathon runner. So I meet Tom, a couple months go by, we do a couple long runs together, and we don't really talk about faith a whole lot. But as Tom and I got to know each other, I learned that he's a really, really strong Christian. He's starting to pour into his faith a lot, has a really interesting, incredible story of his coming to faith. And he had been through hell and back in his own life, something that I'm very much accustomed to. So we were able to talk a lot about that. And I started talking about how I go to 11:22. And then Tom had expressed some interest in changing churches. He was looking for a new church. He comes to 11:22 with me one night. And Tom starts going consistently to 11:22. And then as months and a year or so go by, we're doing long runs all the time together, spending time talking about discipleship and growing our faith and standing firm and all of these values that we believe in. And he has been such an absolute huge impact on my faith journey. And all that to say, I'm able to reflect now and come to the realization that my move to Jacksonville was not a gut feeling for just any reason. It was because the Lord had placed that on my heart at the time of making that decision, where it almost came across in a way that it was in my own control that I was making that decision, when in reality He was the one that was pushing me to do that and calling me to Jacksonville, and it's helping me find a church down here, getting baptized, meeting all these new people who have had such a profound impact on my faith. And it's crazy how the Lord will weave Himself into your life if you're open to it. And we talk in church a lot about posturing yourself, whether you're worshiping or whether you're receiving the word. I think I had to be open to it in my heart. And I think that was something I used to pray about a lot. I remember going to Young Life camp. It was a student ministry camp that we used to go to growing up. And I never had the passion for Christ. I just I would see everybody else with it. I would see my youth pastors with it. They were so gung-ho about their faith. And I never understood it. I was like, I'm here because it looked like a fun weekend. And I understand that Christ died for my sins and he paid the ultimate sacrifice. I understood all that, but my heart wasn't open to it. I didn't know how to do that. And I remember praying at a Young Life camp and asking my youth pastor to pray for basically the passion that everyone else had. And I never knew what it looked like. And now I'm seeing it 10 years later that I'm in Jacksonville, and I can't stop listening to worship music. I can't stop listening to sermons. I can't stop listening to podcasts about faith. And I'm not really doing anything different. I'm just open to it now. And I want to continue to grow my faith because I ultimately know that my days are numbered on this earth, and that when it's my judgment day, I know where I want to be. I know that I want to be with my mom in heaven. I know that I want to be with my family members who have passed. I want to know that I'm going to be with God in heaven for eternity and celebrating. And I want to live my life in a way that when it's my judgment day, he says, well done, good and faithful servant. And it ultimately comes down to trying to disciple more. And I called my friend Tom on the way home from the clinic today, and I just had to express my gratitude for him pushing me, because at one point he felt like he wasn't doing anything crazy. He was just being himself. But it was because of his pushing me to be better and to pour into my faith, even when it was uncomfortable conversations about the things that I struggle with giving up. But knowing that I'm serving the Lord in a better way than the current lifestyle I have, it was because of people like him that allowed me to have my heart more open to God. And now I can be that for Hannah, my girlfriend, because I'm not doing anything different, but she is wanting to be better in her faith and to grow her faith and pour into it because I am doing it and because I am showing how God has changed me. And you might not think that you're doing anything. For anybody that's listening out there, probably nobody, but for anybody that's out there that is basically struggling, whether in the sense that I was, where I didn't have the passion that I really truly wanted, or you feel like you want to disciple somebody or you want to help bring people to faith, the best way to do that is to spend time learning and understanding God and knowing yourself too and repenting for that. And then that will create a better human for others to see you living out your life Christ-like. And that's what's going to bring people to the faith more, is not shoving it down someone's throat, but they observe how you move and operate when it's all for the glory of God. And that's why I never responded well to my faith or to the gospel, was because every time I felt like I was trying to pour into it, it felt like it was shoved down my throat. And that doesn't work well for people like me, and probably a good majority of Americans or anybody across the world. It doesn't work well like that. But you know what works well is living your life in a way that's glorifying God, and people look at you and say, I don't know what he has, but I want that. I want what he has. And that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to just live my life like that, and oops, I'm almost cutting off every car and getting in a wreck. That was really bad. Golly, I'm just getting all hyped up on this stuff. But living my life in a way that, I don't even know where I'm going right now. Living my life in a way that people can see that Christ is moving in me without even knowing that Christ is at the center of my heart. And that's the way my mom always lived her life. Like, if you were to look at videos of my mom or see her and meet her, she wouldn't have to tell you that she's strong in her faith, but you'd be able to point out to my mom and say, that's someone who I want to be like. And it was because she had Christ in the center of her heart. And I think that's just the most important thing to me right now, is growing myself as much as I can so that I can be the same person my mom was, where people look at me and say, I want to be like that person. And it took me so long to realize that, but now I'm coming to understand it. And that changes everything about everything. It changes, our pastor always talks about, he says something like, run over by the grace train. If you were if you were hit by a train and you showed up to church and you had no bumps, bruises, scars, blood, and you were wearing a pressed t-shirt or a pressed dress shirt, and all this stuff, no one would ever think that you were hit by a train. And so if you were truly hit by grace and you have accepted Christ into your heart, but you don't also exemplify that in how you operate your life, then is he truly the center of everything in your life, in your heart? No. But that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to improve. I'm trying to let God change my heart so I can operate in a way that glorifies him. I think it's such an interesting thing and realization that I've come to finally 10 years later. But none of this is a coincidence. If you feel like something is pulling on you and you don't know why, and you're feeling certain senses of change that is interesting to you that you never once had, I would urge you to lean into it, because that's what I did. I didn't really know what I was doing. I just felt like, yeah, moving to Jacksonville is the right decision. I don't know. I guess I'll do it. I got nothing to lose. Worst case is I move back home to Pennsylvania and figure it out. But it was because of that and being open to accepting Christ more seriously that I've been able to get to where I'm at now. And then at one point you'll be able to then disciple others. And ultimately that's our calling. I talked about that in the first video I made, which is Matthew and the Great Commission. So I think it's worth pouring into your heart and leaning into the decisions that God is trying to make. Even if they're not abundantly clear at the time, they will become abundantly clear later, and that's where I'm at. So I hope the same is true for you one day.